Hey, everybody. What's going on, Brian?
Hey,
This is Monday's Mindful. It's only my second week, so please give me some grace here, everybody. I'm Brian. Billy, as you know, usually does all of the clicking of the buttons. And I wanted to thank you first for coming onto the podcast, the MillenniYell on Friday. Did you have fun?
that was a blast.
Yeah, it was
Like,
cool.
it,
Yeah,
it seems like the time flies when you're in conversation like that.
I know. Well, we did preface the beforehand that it could go on for hours because of me loving to talk, which is so true. But it's really neat to get into different topics and talk about things that are we might not get to talk about with different people, but that we want to share. Like when I was just talking to somebody about why I started this Monday's Mindful. There's been things that I've been reading and podcasts and things that I've been sharing, even quotes like in the mornings. I read this little 365 possibilities. It's like these affirmations, but I've been posting them on my Instagram stories sometimes. And people have commented a lot. I talked about this last week, and that, they're like, where did you get that book and what book is that? So I feel that some of the things that I'm doing, which happen to be with a lot of other people, and they're doing, and I'm reaching out and saying, it's really inspiring, or thanks for sharing that, or, thanks for putting that out there, because it's something that more of us should be talking about, So I think that a lot of the stuff that we talked about on Friday, it just sparked a couple things. And I know we had chatted about you coming on, but one of the things I got fired up about a little bit, I feel like, was um, the topics that we were talking about with some of the high school and college kids that you're coaching, and then their parents. And we talked a little bit about the different generations and how the communication goes with them, and like how difficult it is with you having to kind of deal with all of the personalities of the, not just what we knew of. We were the only one interacting for the most part with our coaches, but now you have the parents. And it sparked a little bit about, I think, communication and communication styles and leadership. But then I took it off. Well, I didn't take it off. And this is why we're here, hopefully, is like, because I want to take it a little bit further as to, that not just with your experience with coaching and, the athletes and their parents, but like work and relationships and our friendships, because that's been something that's really, I've seen a big, change in my life, whether it was things that are happening through the pandemic, or after, or just, yeah, I see that there's a big difference between people's communication skills. And I was just kind of seeing, you talked about that you've had to take things from outside, or, that you've learned, but like, what do you think about that? What you deal with on a day-to-day basis for that you have to, that is relevant to other people in their everyday, situations.
Yeah, I think it comes down to reactive versus proactive. Like it's so important this generation, and 2022 is just you have to be proactive with communicating, regardless of what you're doing. Work, a relationship, like anything, family. Everybody's there's like everything is so instant, right? Like instant gratification, but everything's so instant. So like if you're not being proactive, then it kind of puts you behind the eight ball. And I've learned that the hard way. Like I've not
Mm-hmm.
been the greatest communicator by any
Mm-hmm.
means, but just in relationships and in sports, like when I'm coaching, like parents want to know what's going on now before it even happens. Like they want to be prepared way in advance. Like and just like work as well. Like they just want to know. So they want to know what is going to happen when it before it happens.
Right.
Um,
Well, I mean, and that's, I think that can go along the lines with any relation, any
sure.
interaction, in a sense, like it is like with work and a boss and a coworker, an employee, or a relationship, a significant other, or with your family. I think, I had this quote from when I was either when I had instant messenger, AOL, like AIM, you could have like a couple quotes, or like my sister, Facebook, you had these like only one or two quotes that were like about you. And I think one of mine was,
do I even ask you what your screen name was?
List 110.
Okay.
List, because my birthday's January 10th. So, and List 110 was my, obviously Melissa. When I was younger, people called me List, but that's why as I got older, it's Mel now.
Yeah.
My new persona. But it's better to say too much than never to say, anything at all. And I think that I've oversaid things in certain aspects, and, probably more relationships, or just, in general now as I got older. And there's been situations where I speak up, and I'm not afraid to say the truth, and things that I think that there are good and bad things about saying too much, or, but I would rather, say things and then have to deal with, different things than be quiet, and not say anything. So I know it's kind of different with.
You much rather would ask for forgiveness than permission.
Yeah. Or like, I think going back to, I don't know if you would agree with this, but, if you don't say certain things in situations, it can create more chaos, or more hurt, or more pain, or more confusion. So when you're saying like they want, in your perspective of like with the parents or with coaching, they'd rather over communicate, or that you should be sharing more, but rightfully so, because I think that it helps both people a little bit on the understanding. Because if you're holding something in that you also feel is frustrating to you, and you're not sharing that with them, you're going to kind of eat at you a little bit and get mad and maybe yell at them or something. But at the same time, I think with them knowing it, it at least puts it out there that, you've communicated these things, and then you can kind of deal with it. I don't know.
Yeah. My Coach Koslak, who was my head coach at Trinity for basketball, and I coach underneath him, he had a great analogy. He said, when you go to the airport and your luggage, it meets a certain weight limit, like I would rather be overpacked than underpack for vacations. And he said that to me, and I've taken that with everything, like over communicate rather than under communicate, because then there's always that gray area where it's up for grabs. Like no one, everybody's going to assume the worst if you have that huge gray area of communication. So I've always,
as an overpacker, and usually having to take things out of my bag, it's funny. Yeah, I usually do overpack. It's funny, but I've learned to do some more carry-ons these days. So maybe, if we're talking about whatever this is, not in you. I don't know what these things are, but when you're talking in other, using other references, but I've learned to be able to use a carry-on in certain aspects of communication. I think so that it's easier sometimes, not saying certain things, but listening also. So I've learned, over the last couple of years of listening more. And there's been a couple things that people want, to share their story, or people want to be heard. And I think that sometimes, what you brought up about your coach, right? And that, or, that you talked about listening to them, and, or, trying to maneuver, not just telling them things, like kind of, I don't know, listening.
You said it perfectly. It's just trying to sit back and like, sometimes the most powerful tool you have is just listening. And when it comes to communicating. So a lot of coaches, it's a very, like the stereotypical is like, hey, this is my way or the highway. You're going to do things this way. And at the end of the season, I sit down with my players and I give them kind of like an exit interview. But one of the questions I asked them was like, hey, like, I want to hear from you. Like, what do you want to see from a program that we didn't do in 2022 for 2023. Like what, I just want to listen, and just giving them that power. I wouldn't even say power, but giving them the ability to speak and be heard goes a lot farther than me just saying, hey, listen, this is gonna change, we're gonna do it this way, my way. And
I literally was listening to a podcast this morning. I listened to Mel Robbins' podcast. It just came on when I was at the gym. As we were talking, my crazy ass gets up and goes at 6 o'clock. But it's actually good because I get to listen to some really cool podcasts. And this morning it helped here because it was talking about compassion. And I think that that's what, you're saying, is having compassion for their perspectives or where they're at. And one of the biggest things that we're talking about, communication. So I was listening to a different one last week, and it was talking about relationships and how communication. I love Lewis Howes, I think is his last name. And he's awesome. He's had so many of these really fantastic guests. And one of them was a relationship coach, Steven. I think it's like Steven Speaks he kind of created a new name. I don't think it's his real last name, but was about communication is key, like first, in relationships. But he also added comprehension. And then today on the podcast that Mel was talking about was about compassion. And I think that, there's the idea of comprehension is like I talked about this last week on Monday's Mindful that, I'm working on being more open-minded to other people's perspectives, because when you're in growth situation and you've gone through, leadership and trainings and things that you've done in your experience, sometimes it's really hard to understand other people's perspectives when it's, not at a certain level of growth or, whether it's emotional intelligence or just different things. And I think that that's interesting is the compassion side of it, but also comprehension, because you could communicate things back and forth, but it just doesn't go. Just doesn't go. It does not comprehending. It's like that's, we've all done that. And you're like talking to a wall. If you're like, this is just,
you can see it.
Yeah, you can see it, you can feel it. It's like not going anywhere. So it's like that's so much difficult probably for you even, it's one thing to deal with that with a significant other or a friend or a family member, but like you're having to deal with it with how many people, like how many kids that you're coaching and then their parents.
Yeah, it's
I can't imagine.
You said it perfectly. Comprehension is a tough thing to see these days. I do a lot of off the field meetings with the athletes in the off season. We call them nights of the round table, and we just sit down. We talk about soft skills and intangibles. And at first, I thought I was getting to them, right? I thought they were listening and they were taking everything in. And then I slowly started talking to them off the field and outside the meetings, and they weren't hearing anything. So I actually required them to bring a journal in and take notes. And
what is like what describe like soft skills and intangibles? Like examples or
like one meeting was about the ability to respond. Like I talked about last week about how like life is 10% of what happens to you, 90% of how you respond to it. Mm-hmm. And I talked about how to respond in the workforce, respond after a death in the family, respond after not getting your like the starting role that you wanted, or and just communicating with like a significant other, like if a girlfriend is whatever, and just how to deal with that afterwards.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of great communication, Sam with his yo, hey Sam. But I'm getting better with clicking on the background here that Billy usually does. But I think I was talking with a friend on Friday after a long week that we both had. And some of it, like when you say about responding, but like we were talking about reacting and like having reactions, which I guess is the same thing. But when I hear the word react, like I think sometimes it's like a negative, and you're like negative reacting. And her and I had talked about how we've really both, and we know because of, we've known each other for so many years and we've witnessed each other having reactions, whether it's in public or our friends or getting loud or getting angry. And a lot of it is, like internal issues and triggers and things that are really with us. And we were actually swapping some funny stories about moments that we reacted and we just said overreacted or whatever, but we were saying that we were both really working on not reacting and just kind of, you know, taking a breath and a moment and listening and not getting mad, you know, kind of like being in your own head, processing it, which we never used to do, you
Yeah.
know? So
I put a premium on body language. Like I can like I can just tell how someone's feeling or how someone's going to react to a certain situation just by when they drop their shoulders or they start
right.
looking down or
Yeah, body language is huge. Yeah.
yeah. I put a big premium on that. If you're not telling me that you want to play or if you're showing me without words that you're not accepting your role in the team, then I'm not going to play you.
Right.
You're already putting yourself at a disadvantage.
Oh, hey,
What's up, Billy?
Billy. He says, Bear and I are watching
That's awesome.
his dog. What's up, Bear?
Yeah,
Hey, Billy. I'm glad.
and like I even this year I had to let a kid go mid-season just because the way he wasn't reacting to the way his teammate was communicating with him on the field well, so he blew up. That was a trigger for him. And mid-season I had to tell a guy like, listen man, you're going to be more of a detrimental to our team than you are going to be a help. And
yeah,
it's tough.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, and I've been like, that's what it was funny. Her and I were swapping these stories, and I'm like, you know, looking back, like I wish there were moments where, you know, you didn't react and, you know, and say things. But it's funny. One of the things that they had talked about on the podcast this morning was about what I had just said about the perspective. And she calls it my side bias, where you're looking at it just from your side. So clearly you have a bias because you're like, oh, this is my perspective. And, you know, not that you think that it's, you know, only right and wrong and true. But that meeting people where they are. And I've been working on that this year too, is it's got to be really hard also from your perspective, because it's children that are like they're still developing their skills. And like, you know, I've read books about love languages and attachment styles and go to counseling about these things that at 37 years old, like I'm just figuring out, oh my gosh, okay, that makes a lot of sense. And these are like, you know, high school kids that and I reacted and tried to run away in high school. And like I was like, you know, I hate this place, I'm leaving. And there were very justifiable answers that when, you know, you go to talk to someone and they're like, well, this, and you're like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. Okay. And you kind of, you know, once you comprehend, like you have those understanding of why and things, a lot of it, like we were talking about these internal issues, but that, you know, learning to accept people for where they are, and not getting angry at them for not being in that place that you're at, like either growth or, I mean, it's probably sorry, like I don't have kids, you know, obviously like I don't have kids, but even people who have adult, you know, children, like it's got to be so hard trying to do that, accepting of where they're at.
I think here I go again about talking about Gen Z, but one thing they are struggling with is tone. Like because everything's email, texting, DMs, whatever. They don't understand how they're perceived from another perspective. Like you were talking about, like my side or bias is they'll send a text, but they don't understand how that we know we're reading those texts like that person is talking to us.
Right.
And they're not, they don't know that because they're not outside in the real world.
Right.
Everything's so technology based, but I always talk about, hey, look at your tweet or look at your text, look at your email before you even send it and read it out loud and tell me that sounds like the message that you want to portray. And
right.
That's another soft skill meeting that we talk about is just like courtesy, like email courtesy, tweeting, texting.
Oh yeah, that's interesting because I mean, we didn't talk about that. I guess I shouldn't say we didn't talk about that leadership Harrisburg when I was telling you about dealing with different personalities. They were talking about red people who are red and more leaders, and yellow. Of course, I'm a yellow and like creative and energy, and that we send an email and we're like, hey everybody, hope you had a great weekend, la la la, smiley face, and the red person's like, yeah, no, I don't really care if you had a good weekend. I just to the point, like, hey, here's this stuff, get this to me. Like, it's just funny how the difference is, but that's interesting about like different skills that you're teaching, because I think even grown ass women and men could really use the help with the tone. It's not just the tone of your voice, but like you're right, like the texting. It's really hard to read sometimes people's their message or their tone in behind a text. And we all know that adults sit around and they're on social media all day long, sit behind the computer, and spew all this stuff, online. But what was Sam saying? They need to have more face-to-face interaction. We see that problem dealing with kids in my line of work. Just my 2 cents. Absolutely. We talked, Sam, if you didn't get to watch the Friday podcast, Brian was on the MillenniYell, and he talked a lot about that. So you should totally watch the recap if you haven't. But I guess as far as we were talking about like sitting behind text or communication. All right. So I know you brought up about your experience on The Bachelor and that it was really hard for you coming back into like, whether it was dating or whatever. I brought up that I had watched a couple podcasts with there were 2 guys that did Joe Millionaire this year, and they were saying that it was really hard for them to kind of come out of just the filming aspect of it. And I was just curious if, I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that just might want to hear, a quick recap of like how it goes down, but also like when you came back, you said it was hard because you couldn't share certain things or you couldn't do stuff. But then I'm sure it's like such a weird aspect of all of these people, and you're kind of like, what, only so many weeks of trying to like, find this. I don't know. Just what was your perspective on it?
Like you gotta look at it from their perspective, right? The production crew they do a great job at taking you out of your comfort zone and putting you in a scenario that might bring out like the worst in you or the best in you. So
yeah, like those triggers that we talked about, exactly. those responses, but reactions. That's why people go like a little nutty, huh?
Yeah. It's I say this to this day that's one of the most mentally challenging things I have ever had to do. Like even like just outside of the whole structure of the show, dealing with interviews all day, and we call it a man chats. Like we sit down and they film you talking with another guy like about your feelings, and I mean everything. They isolate you so much. Like I mean, my parents picked me up at the airport after I got eliminated, and I bawled my eyes out.
Yeah.
I haven't talked to them. I haven't seen them. And
right.
I have all these feelings that I wanted to talk about. But if I did on the show, then that's going to be aired. And then I don't want to be perceived in that light. Like it's
right.
So it is mentally draining.
I bet.
Sure. But even when I came back, I had to check my waist to see if I was mic'd up and like randomly. And my roommate would say, yeah, dude, you were like screaming in your sleep about like getting the camera out of your face and stuff. I'm like,
oh my gosh, like trauma, like aftermath of like, they say, because this happened to me. I don't, my Apple Watch had actually, I broke it, that the face came off and then I never got a new one. But I know for a fact that I used to get these like, not tremors, but these shocks when I wasn't wearing the Apple Watch. And I would say something to somebody's doctor and like, yeah, that's actually the endorphins like in your brain. Like you would get like a feeling and it would be like, oh, there's a text, or oh, there's an email, or oh, there's a notification, and it would go to your brain. And then there are these like, they're not really there because I wasn't wearing the watch. So it's probably exactly what you were going through.
It was. I mean, I'll tell you this, that, I mean, the show it's genius. What they do is they take away all the distractions from a normal life, and like they put you up against microphones and cameras like right when you wake up. The daily schedule is just grueling.
I bet.
But yeah, so it's It was not what I expected, but I'm glad. I attest like my image, my portrayal on the show. Like I attest that to being a coach and going through college athletics. And
oh my gosh, I saved this link so since we didn't talk about it on Friday, I had this link because I was Googling just to see what year it was. Because remember, I was like, I thought it was 2014 when I kind of had walked by you at level 2. And I was trying to remember the year. And there was this article that was like, yeah, Bachelor Brian Osborne he's a normal guy. And it goes down in this, he's a coach. And it's like all these different, there was like these pictures of you. And it says, have you seen that article?
Didn't they compare me to a cheeseburger?
I know. So I think it was like something super silly. I don't know. I wish I could. I thought I had saved it in a Word. I probably have it in like a Word document.
Wait, I think a photo on that article is from me at Ted's in Midtown.
Yeah, with Drew Wilsbach, actually. I went to high school with him. I was going to bring that up so that you know the article, because I was like, oh my gosh, Drew must have posted that on Instagram or something, and you were in it. So yeah, they compared you, I think, to a cheeseburger. But they were saying about that actually, I think it might have even said something, I'm going to try to pull it up, about you being like the most normal guy that was on the show. I don't know if they meant that season or ever, but they absolutely said something about you, just, which is, obviously, complimentary, I think, but
when I went on it, I just didn't want to be someone who I wasn't. Like I told my parents, and my mom asked me right away, she's like, hey, listen, like represent your family, represent the community, but don't stray away from who you are, regardless of the scenario they put you in. And they try to put you in some really difficult situations.
Really? I mean, it's funny because I couldn't imagine. I mean, obviously, some of the guys and girls. I actually really didn't watch the show until I think it was The Bachelor, but I think it was when I was going through my divorce in 2016. I started to watch it because I was like, oh, I want to watch some other people's relationship dramas, I don't really like watching drama TV because I'm like, I stress in my, enough with my business. But I started watching it, and I think I said something at the time like, oh, if I'm still single by a certain time, or I think I even joked if I ever got divorced, I would go on it. And then I think at that point, but we were talking on Friday after the fact, I think you and I and Billy, that I was like, I'm too old to be on there. Anyway.
Yeah, it's interesting.
But
I get a lot of DMs or texts from friends saying like, oh yeah, my cousin is being interviewed for the show. Can you give her any pointers or give him any pointers? I'm like, yeah, don't go on it.
Oh no. Yeah.
And I actually have to call them, and like, it's really almost like a vetting interview. I give them, I say, hey, listen, I hope you're prepared for what you're signing up for.
Right.
Like, how do you handle not getting a date card, or how do you handle drama around you and like people? It's just
right, and it being recorded.
Walk away with your girl, like,
yeah.
How can you handle that?
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting too, because you're competing. It's a competition, and you're probably feeling like there's so much like self-doubt and like insecure, I mean? You're like, your mind is probably like 24/7 just thinking about it. That's gotta be wild. But I was interested when you said about them putting you through like these, like, not trainings, but what was it that you said that they would sit you down and have like these what was man that shots. Yeah, what were they trying, like, saying to be more vulnerable, like what?
Yeah, I mean, what America sees is 3 guys sitting around a couch having a conversation about the girl or about their date, about how they're feeling. But behind the scenes, that's a producer's over our shoulder asking us questions, and we can't address the producer. We have to talk about it in our group.
Okay.
So there's topics that are brought up, but there's some moments where like a producer would ask me a question that's like super irrelevant, and I would turn and be like, dude, are you seriously asking me that? Like,
yeah,
can I talk about this with the guys? Like, what?
Right.
So yeah, like it's I would say the daily schedule is wild. Like, you wake up and your producer, every producer has a group of contestants, and your producer will come up to you and be like, "Hey, Mel, I need another post cocktail hour party interview. Also, bring what you wore to the group date. We need to go over an interview for that.
Like
then you're gonna do a man chat. You're gonna do a man chat with Chris and Dylan, and then you're gonna later like, hey, do you want to? I need more. I need more material from pre-date card, like." And so each interview, you're in there with them. They say, "Hey, so the scenario is this. You have to." You're basically channeling your feelings from a certain other moment.
Huh.
Like I had to wear my suit, tie, and the rose that I got from a group date in an interview. I'm wearing like shorts and flip flops.
Oh, that's funny.
But they had to say, they're like, "Hey, so you just got to the cocktail party. Tell us how you feel going into it." And this is like 2 days later.
Oh, see, that's interesting because I was wondering about how when they do them right after, it looks like they film it right after.
Yeah,
like
that's not. So
huh.
That part about it was so interesting because you have to channel these feelings that you had yesterday, 2 days ago, or like you could be productive and proactive and be like, "Hey, it's tomorrow before the date card. Tell us how you feel going into this date card." And I would have to like sit there and be like, "All right, how would I feel?" Like I have no idea. So you're having to channel these feelings that you haven't even had yet, or you already had them in real time, and you have to like bring them back, recycle.
Right.
So.
I wonder if that's like part of their game, like the psychological.
It is absolutely
mess with you, keep you like. It's got to be hard because I was reading like some stats about dating and like the YouTube stuff and the podcast that I watch about dating today, and I have friends that are not single, and they're like, "Oh my god, I can't imagine dating today and what it's like." And I'm not on dating apps, like I never was, but they're it's funny stories like now. I mean, I know that was years ago, but there's definitely a lot of people out there that are single. I think dating. I think one of the guy that the Steven Speaks that he does like the relationship. He said, I think it was like 39% of relationships failed during the pandemic. So there's like, we're out here.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think, I don't know, I guess what would, in a sense, like the qualities that we're talking about, like obviously communication. I mean, and you said just being yourself. I think, just being authentic, that's one of the things that I'm looking at, looking at our purpose and vision and, mission and going into next year. And I think one of the biggest things for me is just being yourself and being authentic. And that, I've learned that people, some people like, they're either going to be right or they're not right, and I think that experience, like you put yourself out there obviously in front of the whole country, let alone world, but it's interesting that I think that's what more people need to do today, and need to do in general, is just really be vulnerable and put themselves out there and be authentic and be themselves. I think a lot of people don't know themselves, and they, really need to do some growth and work finding out who they really are. And, it takes a lot of work and who they want to be. But, yeah, maybe that's why some of the people that go on there, you see like really good sides of people, and then you see like bad sides of people because they get under that pressure and it comes out like in ways because they don't know how to.
I've met a lot of people that either got a really bad edit and they're great people, or they got a really good one and they're just like a crappy person, like in general.
That makes sense. Like,
I agree with you. Like the authenticity of today is hard to find. And I think like your number one priority in life is to find out what makes you come alive. And if you don't know that yet, then that's like the work you have to do. So like, it's so hard these days, like with the Instagram and TikTok and everything on social media. Like people are looking at other people's authenticity. So they're looking at these other people and they're wanting to be them, but in actuality, they're not even finding out who they really are. They're just they're looking at other people's lives from a distance, and they're like, oh yeah, that's like, I want to be that person. And like, well, hey, listen, let's find out who you actually are first.
Right. Well, and it's also like the highlight reels. We talk about that on the podcast all the time, that a lot of the things that we post. I mean, I post stuff that I like to do. I've always enjoyed doing photo shoots and modeling, just do it for fun. But it's something that I've really wanted to get back into. I did it when I was in college, and I started to put that on my Instagram, and if people don't like it, that's fine, but it's stuff that really I enjoy doing, and I like to do, and it's part of things that I'm passionate about. So I want to put that out there, and like telling like a story behind things and things that I like and things that I'm doing. But I put stuff out there on the podcast, and I also share things that are not great highlights. Obviously they're bad things, and when you have like bad days, but it's hard to see people's highlight reels, and you're right, like, oh my gosh, look at them. But in reality, we have no idea who they really are, and you say about it's just on the outside. So I think when we're looking at all this stuff on the outside and the outside and the outside, it's easy to just lump ourselves on just the outside and the outside and the outside too, instead of, diving deep. And I've said after my divorce, and one of the things I've talked about is like really wanting to know someone really to the core, like someone really, really deep, and wanting them to know me. And it's funny, as I said this for, it's 7 years that I've been divorced, and, I've had a relationship here or there, but I've been, single for 2 years. But one of the biggest things was I really didn't know myself to the core. So then I'm like, wait, how do I, demand and require this of somebody, and this is what I want, to know someone so deep, sick, like really, really to the core. And I'm like, and I want them to know me, but oh no, I don't want them to know me, because there's things about it that, I was not working on. And then when I started to really get to know me and make a lot of, changes and face my fears and, realities, and be honest with myself, I'm like, okay, yeah. And then you can start being honest with somebody else, So I think that it's so much deeper than just seeing those highlight reels, because it's we're all kind of lumped into that, getting to know someone who they really are, because on the outside it could look great. They could be, whether it's their Instagram or just their lifestyle or whatever, but on the inside they could not be a good fit or a good match or a good person. But I do think it starts with us.
Yeah. Sure. I mean, I relate that to my recruiting process. Like I get 20 to 30 emails a day with players that are sending me their highlight film. I'm like, that's awesome. But like, hey, what's your club schedule like, so I can come and watch you actually play? And I'm not like, every player is thinking that we're looking at their plays, or like their ability to take someone on one-on-one, like all these technical things. I'm watching how you treat your coach, how you treat your teammates. Like when your teammate comes off the field, are you giving them a high five, or are you just sitting there waiting for your moment to get in? Or if there was a bad call by a ref, like how are you? I'm watching that. I'm not watching your foot skills or whatever. There's everybody's sending highlight film these days, and you're right. Like social media is full of just highlight reels, and that's why even they talked about the face-to-face interaction. Like that's what needs to happen more often. Like you want to see someone handle certain situations outside of their highlight reel, and it speaks volumes about their character. We have 4 pillar words that we base our program off, and our culture is like selflessness, toughness, respect, and character. And character is one of the ones I always talk about. It's like, hey, what are you doing when I'm not around? Like, take me through.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because that shows about someone's true character, someone's inner self. Like, are you going to gym? Are you clocking in for study hall, but are you really studying? Like, are you just clocking in because you have to be there because it's a requirement? So I think high character people are just hard hard to come by these days.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it goes back to, like you said, I mean, as a recap, like face to face, interaction and human connection. We talked about that on Friday. And I think it's so lacking because that I think you can tell. My thing is, I feel, and maybe it's not 30 seconds. I say it's 30 seconds, but it's like, when I first meet somebody and I'm having a conversation, or I know within 30 seconds, like, can I have an actual, deep, honest, a real conversation with this person? Usually you can kind of tell. And it's just, I think it's the energy and, connections with people. But I think that's, you can't do that behind a phone, as much at all. So yeah, I think all across the board, definitely, definitely more human. And here we are on a podcast, virtually. You're there, I'm here.
I know. I was just thinking that.
What a hypocrite. But no, I mean, I think that it's also, getting your story, your story, and not just, video. I think videos are great. I was telling a couple people that you do get to see a little bit more about people. I feel like, it's still somewhat face to face, but
yeah, I think this, like in this day and age, everything's so like result driven. So people see like the result, but they don't see like how they got there.
Mm-hmm.
And I tell my players all the time, I'm like, listen, what's more important, like who you became or what you acquired? Like,
right.
People are looking on social media and they're seeing like, oh yeah, they're traveling to Ibiza, but like, do you see the hard work they put in to like get that plane ticket and like earn that? They don't. So
right.
I
That's definitely one of the people that I've been watching some YouTube and podcasts as well. I just get like great little nuggets of all this information every time I'm listening to them. I'm just like, I love it. But it was about, it's not always like, you have a vision, you have a goal. It's not achieving the goal. It's what you become throughout the process of achieving it. So it's really all that journey and that growth and like who you're becoming and who you've become. It's not the reward is what, we've set out to have that goal or to have that, and that's great. And I think that when we get there, we're like, yeah, this is great. We've achieved this and we've gotten here. But I think it's really all along the way of the commitment and the dedication and, the routines and all the things that you do to get there. And we don't even get to that point because a lot of people don't even take the action to get, to even put that forth. So yeah, I agree. For sure.
It's trusting the process.
Yeah.
A lot of people
it's hard.
lose focus on the process.
Yeah, it's hard.
So
like it
driven by results and acquisitions but
yeah.
Cherishing the moment and cherishing the process, like the ups and downs, the peaks and valleys of it too are huge.
Absolutely. Well, cool. Well, speaking of peaks and valleys, I think we're about that time. But I really appreciate you coming on for my second Monday's Mindful. You're welcome anytime to come back. And MillenniYell with Billy and I on Fridays. Obviously, we're going to have you back and then come on here. So I'd like to hear a little bit of that perspective. I always like hearing guys' perspectives about like dating and, being vulnerable. It's always interesting. But yeah, thank you for coming on. And we hope everybody enjoyed this. And we'll see you guys hopefully another time, I guess. Signing out. Bye, guys.